Good evening, everyone. I'll start by saying that before this war began, on the eve of it, Netanyahu was at the Kotel. Moreover, it's not that common for Netanyahu to be at the Kotel. But even when he is there, he usually doesn't put on a talith gadol. This time, he was wearing a large talith. And what's most interesting is that a week later, Netanyahu was again at the Kotel. Of course, for the Prime Minister of Israel, unfortunately, this doesn't happen very often. But what's also interesting is that the members of the War Cabinet, who decide whether there will be a war and how to conduct it, the most select ministers, after they had made all their decisions, they divided the book of Tehillim among themselves, and over the course of an hour and a half, they basically finished it. That is, between all of them, they recited the entire book of Tehillim. This, of course, is also a special moment that shows that even the heads of government, even the chosen ministers, understand very well how much all of this depends on heaven, the entire course of the war. And of course, for the first strike to be successful, it wasn't so simple. It required a lot of luck, a lot of help from above. As I believe, it's called Siyata Deshmaya, help from heaven. An interesting thing is that Netanyahu himself made a sort of, well, a kind of joke. Netanyahu said, "What is the biggest? What is the biggest Esai in the Knesset?" Esai basically means party. "What is the biggest party in the Knesset?" he said. "The biggest Esai is Siyata Deshmaya, help from heaven." So it's a play on words, because as we said, Siyata Deshmaya means help from heaven. In other words, the greatest thing, what we need most, is help from heaven. And it's amazing that even the heads of government understand this so well. Indeed, the undeniable fact that Israel possesses significant superiority in the skies above Iran, without any other nation or entity actively interfering or offering substantial resistance to their aerial operations. This is truly an incredible and remarkable thing to behold, and it is unequivocally one of the most crucial factors that ultimately made this extraordinary opportunity genuinely possible. It was a very carefully disguised drone base, secretly created by Mossad itself, right on Iranian territory and not far from the borders of Iran. And drones were produced there, and these drones were the ones that destroyed the anti-aircraft defenses. That's why Israeli planes were able to freely enter Iran and operate freely on its territory. And to this day they continue to operate freely in Iran. All of this, of course, anyone with eyes in their head understands is tremendous help from the Almighty, without which none of this would have been possible. But the miracles themselves are not only happening on Iranian territory. But the interesting thing is that we don't know all the details. We don't know everything. I think that the miracles that happened with the missiles that landed here, the Iranian ballistic missiles that go out into space and then come back down from space, they landed here. Missiles that can cause a lot of damage, take, God forbid, many lives, and unfortunately have already taken quite a few lives. But in any case, I want to share with you some of the miracles that have happened. The first miracle, and the more well-known one, is that one of the missiles hit a building at the Soroka Hospital in Beersheba, and nothing was left of that building. Interestingly, about 6 hours before that, The hospital management decided that this building was not reliable enough, and they decided to move all the patients to other floors, meaning to the uppermost floors, to other floors, or to distribute them elsewhere. 6 hours later, a missile hit that very spot, and nothing was left of the upper floor. On the other hand, a completely opposite miracle happened in Bnei Brak. In Bnei Brak, a missile hit a school building, and this school is for special students, meaning those who have certain difficulties. And these students, basically, it's like a boarding school. So they also sleep there. There are two buildings. One is a new building, and the other is an old building. The students sleep in the old building, and they study in the new building. And then it was decided that, since there is a danger, it would be better for the students to also sleep in the new building. This was suggested by the architect who built the building, and the school principal agreed with it, but said, let's wait a few days. Interestingly, just a few days later, there was no need to move the children anywhere, because the building they had planned to move the children into, well, there was nothing left of it at all. That's the first thing. Moreover, not only was there nothing left of that building, but even the bomb shelter, there was nothing left of it either. An interesting thing is that the neighbors around usually went to the bomb shelter of this school. That is, those who lived nearby would go to the school's bomb shelter, and the key to the shelter was kept by one of the neighbors. This time, the neighbor who had the keys to the bomb shelter was sleeping so soundly that he didn't hear anything, and the bomb shelter remained locked. So the neighbors, they had to look for another place for themselves, and they went to other bomb shelters. From what we can see from above, if everyone had been in that shelter, as I said, nothing would have been left, either of the school itself nor of the bomb shelter that was on the school grounds. But let's see what the Torah tells us, where there is a hint about this operation in the Torah, and what it conveys, what kind of awareness it gives us here. What is the Torah teaching us here? Basically, I think that if we, together, if we thought about what kind of message the Almighty wants to give us, what He wants to awaken in us to what is happening, I would say there are two things here. On the one hand, you have to remember well that this is not our own merit. I think these things, as we said, any reasonable person can understand. I just want to recall, together with you, we wrote an article on this topic, released a video, and I want to share some data about it with you. For example, the area of Iran is 1,745,150 square kilometers. It's the 18th largest in the world. It is twice the size of Turkey and 3 times the size of France. Meanwhile, Israel's area is less than 2% of Iran's territory. You can cross Israel from north to south in 7 hours by car, and from west to east, at its narrowest point, in a single day on foot. But the vast territory of Iran gives it strategic depth. Israel, on the other hand, is vulnerable. Israel's population is 10 times smaller than Iran's. Oil reserves rank 4th in the world, and at the current rate of consumption, they will last for 239 years. Israel has none, well, just a little bit, of natural gas. As for Iran, it ranks second after Russia, while Israel has an absolutely tiny, minimal amount that they extract. And of course, anyone who watches the video will see additional data. So, what do we see from this? We see exactly what was said, and that's how we end the video. What was said in the second weekly Torah portion when this war began? We know that after the weekly Torah portion, they read verses from the prophets. And this time, they read verses from the prophet Zechariah, who says, in other words, not by some army, not by some force, but you will prevail by my Spirit. The help of the Almighty. That's what we must always remember, that our success is not our own strength, but the help of the Almighty. Now, the second thing, of course, is that the Almighty shows us the greatest love, the greatest mercy towards us. Let's think about that. There is a wonderful thing that is truly astonishing. Let's reflect on it. If we know that one of the ways to interpret the Torah is through acronyms, now we know that this operation, it's called an operation, this war, this military operation, the name is Hen Am Kalavi Jakim Vikar Yanasa. Here the people will rise up like a lion, one of the names of a lion, and Yanasa, and will be exalted like a lion. Now let's check where in the Torah there are verses whose acronym is Lavi. That's what the operation is called, Amka-Lavi. Where is there an acronym for this word Lavi? That is, lion. It's an amazing thing. There are only 3 verses. And let's think about whether there's any connection between them. 1 verse. This is a significant verse found within the ancient and sacred book of Shmuel, also known as the books of Samuel. After that, we then have one particular instance in the sacred book of Tehillim, which is also known as Psalms. Again, Lavi. Besides that, we have a verse that says, this is already in Devarim, in the portion of V'echanan. Hashem, that is Yehuda. Your merits, the Almighty brings you into this land. What do we see from these verses? I think it's amazing. The same idea. The idea that says it's not our merit. None of it is our merit. But moreover, a person might think that it's my own merit. Because of 3 things. Because he might think that he himself is strong, that he has good weapons, or because he will consider that he has some merit, some good commandments, that he fulfills some great commandments. Let's see how each of these verses speaks about a different aspect of this. Why is it forbidden for a person? Is it that a person shouldn't think that it's because of him? On one hand, it says, not by his own strength will a person succeed. That's the person's own strength. On the other hand, not by their sword will they inherit the land, and not by your righteousness will you inherit the land. All these verses, their acronym is Kolovi. Moreover, usually in several places, when the Talmud wants to convey to us that an important idea is found in the Torah, the Talmud says that this idea is written in the Torah, repeated in the Nevi'im, the prophets, and a third time mentioned in the Ketuvim, the writings. Let's look at these verses. One verse is found in the Torah. The second verse is found in the Nevi'im, in the book of Shmuel, and the third one in the Ketuvim, in the writings in Tehillim. Moreover, each of these verses begins with the word ki. What is ki? It means because. But that's not all. That is, first of all, we need to know that throughout the entire Torah, in the whole Tanakh, there is not a single instance of an abbreviation of verses that would form other verses, except for these, which form this particular abbreviation. How do I know this? The thing is, my teacher, Rav Aronofsky, wrote his book 20 years ago. He adds something new every time. So, one of the things written in his book, this book is dedicated to various interesting abbreviations. He explains them, and he searched for them using a computer. And one of these things is Kalavi. So it's not something someone just came up with now. He already pointed it out in his book. In fact, they say that even the Chatham Sofer, who lived 300 years ago, maybe a bit less, he mentions it too. It's an amazing thing. But that's not all. And where is the abbreviation for the word Kiri mentioned? After all, we know that this verse, Hanem Kalavi Yakum, is what Balaam uses to bless the Jewish people. And he says, Hanem Kalavi Yakum, behold, a people will rise like a lion, and he will lift himself up like an Ari. That's another word for lion. Is there an abbreviation for the word Kiri in the Torah, in the Tanakh? Rav Aronofsky, my teacher, brings up an interesting point. What is it? Yes, there is, but only in one verse. Which verse is that? Because your God, He is a merciful God. Kikuel Rekem Hashem, that's Yud, that's Ka'ari. What is written further on in the verse? He will not let you falter, and will not give you over to your enemies. Interesting. Another interesting thing is that we see, on the one hand, the verses tell us that we shouldn't think this is an abbreviation of the word Kalavi. But on the other hand, we're told that we should. Why should we? We need to understand why this is happening, why the Almighty gives us such success. Now, why is one mentioned as Kalavi? One lion, a synonym for lion, is a hint that we shouldn't think. And in the word Ka'ari, there's a hint that we should think about why this is happening. The thing is, as Ramban explains this verse, Lavi is still a young one, a young lion, while Ari is an adult lion. That is, when consciousness is not yet developed, at the very least you should understand negation. But when you go further, when your consciousness is more developed, then you can also understand positively that all of this is happening because of the great love that the Almighty has for us. There's another interesting thing about this verse from Ramkel. Ramkel published a book called Sirat Ramkel, and there Ramkel explains various verses. On this verse, Ramkel writes that it is talking here about a war that will happen. It's not entirely clear from Ramkel whether this will be the war of Gog and Magog, or a war that will precede the war of Gog and Magog. But in any case, Ramkel says that this will be one of the last wars. And Ramko writes that the nature of a lion is such that if it sees someone dead who cannot act, it leaves him alone. But if it sees that someone is about to attack it, then it attacks him first of all. And Ramko says that this is how this war will be. When the Jews see that someone, some nation, wants to attack them, they will act first. They themselves will attack them before being attacked. It's difficult to say exactly what is meant, what the war of Gog and Magog is, and all the different things related to it. We can't take the various things that are said in Kabbalah and say for sure what exactly they are referring to. Why? Because sometimes it's talking about certain trends, about something non-specific. So to say with certainty that this is exactly what it's referring to, that right now this is the war of Gog and Magog, I wouldn't want to say that. But in any case, there are, of course, some very, very interesting points here. And that abbreviation we mentioned, it's certainly an amazing thing that it's specifically in 3 verses, 3 pasukim, that this abbreviation of the war appears. This is undoubtedly some kind of message from the Almighty to us. What we need to remember well is that it's not our own strength in all of this. It is the Creator's help, and only thanks to this help do we have the possibility to win. This awakens us to the thought, if we now see that many have been eliminated, in fact, at the very beginning of the war, the entire military leadership was wiped out. You need to know exactly where each of the commanders is, who the commander is, and their precise location in order to eliminate them. 10 of the top scientists connected to nuclear, to the development of nuclear weapons, were also eliminated. This also requires knowing very well who the scientist is. We see that the intelligence service is working very well. But if that's the case, a question arises. On October 7th, when the attack on Israel happened, how could such simple things that could have been known, there were so many different warning signs, so many things that could have drawn attention. And yet, something like this was missed. How could that be? Here we have to remember a truth that has been said. And if it doesn't happen, if the Almighty Hashem, as King David says, if the watchman does not, if the Almighty does not guard the city, protect it Shavshakat Shomer, then in vain, for nothing, the watchman will guard this city. Nothing will help. Ein etzavi ein tevuna lunegd Hashem. As King Solomon says, there is no counsel, no wisdom. If the Almighty has decided something, then so it will be. But on the other hand, my teacher, Rav Hillel Zaks, the Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron, once saw a guard and asked him, "Why do you even need to stand guard? Is there any value in what you're doing? After all, it's written in the verse, Em Hashem lo yishmer ayar, shavshakat shomer. If the Almighty does not guard the city, then it's pointless for the guard to watch over it." The man hesitated and didn't know what to answer, and Rav Hillel Zaks said to him, "Pay attention to the verse itself. Pay attention to what it actually says. What does it say? It says, Em Hashem lo yishmer ayar, shavshakat shomer. If the Almighty does not guard the city, then it's pointless for the guard to watch over it. But if the Almighty does guard, then it's not pointless for the guard to keep watch. So, of course, we should be filled with gratitude to all the soldiers and the pilots, everyone who is involved in the defense of Israel. We're not going to say that what they did isn't important, but we need to understand who stands behind this, who helps them, and without whose help none of this would be possible. I think this is the most important message that we need to remember. So, what will happen? Where is this all heading? And why is everything that's happening actually happening? We need to know, and I think many people already know this. Our sages have said quite a few things. In several places, it is said what will happen, what troubles the Ishmaelites will bring to the Jews. Basically, the Ishmaelites are Arabs, Muslims. And why will it be this way? Why is it going to be like this? Because essentially, the Arizal says that sometimes, that all impurity, this is a deep concept. I hope you'll understand it. Impurity can only exist when it is somehow connected to spiritual purity, to something holy. Why? Because the holy is a connection to the Almighty. There is nothing in this world, not even spiritual impurity, that can exist on its own. It means that even impurity, in order to have its own power, it needs some kind of connection to holiness. And Ishmael, he had some kind of connection to holiness. Abraham prayed for him, saying, "Let Ishmael live before you. Let Ishmael live before you, says Rashi, with fear of God." And the Zohar on this verse says, Oelenu, the Zohar says that this request of our forefather Abraham is a great trouble for us. Because this is what gave strength to Ishmael. And the Zohar says that in the heavens, the guardian angel of Ishmael will stand and say to the Almighty, "What reward is due for Ishmael performing circumcision?" The Almighty will say, yes, the Almighty performs circumcision, but he doesn't do it properly and doesn't do it on the 8th day. The angel says, "Yes, I agree. But still, he should be given some kind of reward." The Almighty said that the land of Israel, at the time when the Jews are in famine, it will mostly be in their hands, and they will cause great troubles for the Jews returning to the land of Israel. And the Zohar says terrible things. Basically, in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, it is also said that Ishmael. This name comes from the fact that he is called Ishmael because the Almighty will hear, in the end, before the coming of the Mashiach, hey, the Ishmaelites will cause such troubles for the Jews that their cries will be heard by the Almighty. The same thing is said in the book of Zohar, that there will be great troubles that the Ishmaelites will cause us. And again, it must be said, it should be clarified, when we talk about Muslims, about Arabs, I am not talking about everyone. Here, we are talking about some main, maybe core group. Among any people, there are different kinds of people. And we never talk about everyone, about all people or all representatives of that nation. But this, basically, is what is said in the Zohar. And the Zohar says, when will this end? When the merit of Ishmael runs out, then it will all be over. There's also another interesting thing mentioned in the Tractate Yoma. In the Tractate Yoma it says, Rev also believes that, in the end, before the coming of the Messiah, apparently, the kingdom of Paras, that is, the Persians, Iran, will fall into the hands of Edom. Edom refers to the European nations, or America as well. That is, many representatives of European nations are in America. So basically, America is, in many, in. It can also be called Edom. Moreover, Edom comes from the word Adam, which means red. Everyone knows that the color red dominates the Republican Party and President Trump. His ties are almost always red. His cap is red. And again, it should be clarified. We're not trying to say that this is exactly what's written in the Gemara, in Tractate Yoma. Some processes are being discussed there. How exactly things will turn out, we can't know, as Rambam writes, until we actually see it. But in any case, yes, I think it's useful to know that everything is unfolding according to plan. As it said, many things have already been mentioned in the books of our sages. And what's left for us, what we still need to think about, is what applies to us, how we can conduct ourselves, what we should do. This, if we're saying this is happening now, or it's heading in that direction. In any case, our sages say, what should a person do during the war of Gog and Magog? He should study Torah, do acts of kindness, and help others. These are the things that protect a person, and of course, one of the most important things is to trust in the Almighty. To understand that all our strength comes from the Almighty. I think that Daniel understood this to some extent. If he goes to pray week after week, I think he has realized and understands that it's not as usual. It's not us and our own strength. We still need a lot of help from the Almighty going forward. And as I said, trust in the Almighty. Interestingly, Breskarav, the great rabbi from Brest, so at first he was in Brest, then he moved to Jerusalem. He was in Jerusalem. And when he was in Poland, he fled from there. So Poland was occupied by the Nazis, and at the very beginning there were air raids, but they weren't that serious. Breskarov was very worried and searched for the best possible bomb shelter, and he thought a lot, put a lot of thought into how to find the right, suitable bomb shelter. But when the bombings became much more intense, he stopped looking for a bomb shelter altogether. He calmly sat and wrote his. And he was asked, "How come? When there were such serious bombings, you weren't calm at all. But now you're so calm, not looking for any bomb shelter." He answered very simply, "Before, well, we have a commandment to take care of our own lives. I was looking for the best bomb shelter to fulfill that commandment. But now, no bomb shelter will help. So, what is there to worry about? We are all in the hands of the Almighty. And that's why I'm calm." And even when he went to bed, he put on his pajamas, and he said, "I slept and I felt at peace." He kind of said it with his pajamas on. He showed everyone just how great his trust in the Almighty was. It's the same thing here. We should, by the way, once, during a heavy bombing, they told Breskarov they really didn't want him to stay, so they convinced him to go to the bomb shelter. And when they came back, they saw that right next to the spot where he usually sat, there was a hole in the wall, and it was clear that a bomb or some kind of missile had gone through there. They told him, "See, it's a good thing you went." To this, Breskarov replied, "No, it's you. You're the ones to blame. It's your fault there's a hole here. Because if I wasn't meant to die, then if I had stayed, everything would have remained as it was. There wouldn't be any hole at all. And it's precisely because you convinced me, basically dragged me by force to the bomb shelter, that now there's a hole here. So you're the troublemakers. It is our duty to see the hand of the Almighty in everything that happens, and to put our trust in Him, especially in moments like these. As I mentioned, our guests from America have already been unable to leave and return home for 2 weeks. They came here for a wedding. This is what is said in that weekly Torah portion. When it all began, when this war started, it says there, when the Almighty says you go, you go. When the Almighty says you stay, you stay. That's how it was for the Jews in the desert. Often they found themselves in places with beautiful palm trees and streams, springs. In those places, you'd think they'd want to stay longer, but the very next day they would move on. But in the book, for example, in Mara, where the waters were bitter, they stayed for a long time. Why is that? Because that's one of the aspects of trust. Everything that happens, the Almighty is guiding me. I don't always, and often can't, understand why things happen this way, what the Almighty wants from me. But we need to understand, the Almighty wants you to be in Israel right now. You can't leave because that's the very best place for you to be at this moment. So let's remember these important truths we've mentioned, that everything is in the hands of the Almighty. Everything comes from Him and His love for us. And let's put our trust in the Creator. Thank you. I see that someone has sent in a question. How do our sages view Iran? Are they descendants of Esau? They are definitely not descendants of Esau. Most likely, basically, they're not Arabs. It's Persia. But more accurately, you could say they represent Ishmael, since Ishmael, that's a religion that mainly comes from Ishmael. So I would associate them more with Ishmael. But basically, according to how our sages mention it, it's something separate. What is the name of your teacher's book? Is it in Russian? My teacher's book is called Mifleet Midariteka. Unfortunately, the book is not in Russian, but if anyone is interested, actually, you know what? In our questions to the rabbi groups and in the Zoom group, I'll post a photo from this book where this is mentioned. Unfortunately, the photo and the book are in Hebrew. I'll try, maybe, to translate it and post it as an article on the website. Tell me, who recognized the prophet at the Kotel? Unfortunately, I didn't quite understand the question. Which prophet at the Kotel?
At the beginning of the lesson, you said that near at the Kotel.
Yes, to everyone.
I got goosebumps.
No. No. You, apparently. Either I expressed myself incorrectly. Near the Kotel, Netanyahu, our prime minister, on the eve of this operation, he went to the Kotel, stood there. And just recently, he was also at the Kotel. Is that what I was talking about? But it's quite possible that Eliav was there too. All right, all the best. We will pray together with you. By the way, in that weekly Torah portion, when the war began, it also says that when you go to war against your enemies. And by the way, from the verses it's clear that it's not when they attack you, but when you go to war against your enemies. That is, really, this is a very strong hint at wars like the war with Iran. As it is said, if you make a chain, trumpets, and blow them in order to elevate your prayers, your appeal to the Almighty, and the Almighty will save you. That's what it says in the portion of Bihalacha. All the best to everyone. Thank you. Take care.